Okay, what is your name?
My name is Dennis Lennenkamp.
Awesome. Okay, so, where and when were you born?
I was born in Des Moines, Iowa, on January 31st, 1945.
Um, what was your life like growing up?
Very boring. No, not really. It was pretty active as a kid. We did a lot of closeness with the neighbors. We played a lot of games. We ran until well after dark, and that was the younger years when my father rebuilt our home starting in 1956. So I'd have been like 11 years old. So my brother and I, who was 3 years older, he and I got tied into a lot of work, and it was quite an extensive process to rebuild that house. My dad traveled somewhat at the time, and he would always leave major assignments and work for us to do when he was gone. But I worked on that house until I was 17. I went to 12 years of Catholic school, 8 years grade school, 4 years Catholic high school. Went to Darling High School in Des Moines, and at that time it was an all-boys school. And graduated from that school, and in approximately April of '62, I turned 17 in January of '62. In April of '62, I pre-enlisted in the Marine Corps, and then I went into the big boot camp in June of '62. And I was in the Marine Corps from 1962 until 1965. I served a short time in Vietnam, and fortunately I was scheduled to get out, and that shortened my tour of Vietnam. I had met your grandmother, my wife Marcia, in 1964, and we dated until I had to go overseas. It was involuntary. And so when I came back, I went back to Des Moines for a short period of time to visit my folks. Then I went back to California, and I went to work as a lineman for Southern California Edison. And I was a lineman there I worked there from 66 till 71. There I went to Washington State and worked for the Department of Interior for a group that was called Bonneville Power. And I worked there only a year and a half and decided to join the elevator business, which my dad and my brother were in. So we traveled from Washington back to Iowa, and that's when I got into the elevator business. I worked in the elevator business from 1973 until 2003. At that time, we retired, and I've been retired for 22 years. And as far as, do you want to ask more questions, or I'm rattling on too long?
No, you're doing good. You can keep talking if you have more.
Yeah. Well, my wife Marcia and I have been married for 59 years, and hoping to make it to 60 next February. We've lived all over the country. We lived in California. We were married in California. We lived in California from 66 till 71. We moved from California to Washington. We lived in Washington for just a year and a half. Then we moved back to Iowa in 73. And we lived in Iowa until 82. At that time, I went to Texas, and then we moved there in 83. And we lived in the Irving, Texas area from 83 until 2003 when I retired. And then we traveled for a couple of months all across the western United States, and we ended up in a town called Ruidoso, New Mexico, a mountain community, which we had planned to go to. We lived there from 2003 until 2014, when we moved back to Iowa to be close to our son Chris and his family. And we lived in Washington, Iowa from 2014 until 2020. 2020, yeah. I was at 19. But then we moved back to Texas. We moved to Abilene, Texas. And we've been there for 4 years. And we thoroughly enjoy it. So now, do you want to, that puts us up to the present.
Yes.
Do you want to?
So, going back to growing up in schooling, what was your schooling like? You already talked a little bit about it, but going into more detail.
I mean, grade school was typical. I went to Catholic school, and those were very very crowded classrooms. I can remember my 8th grade class, there was 54 kids in that class. It's kind of funny that teachers today complain about 25 kids. Mm-hmm. It was 50, and she was the principal. It was a nun. She was the principal. They were somewhat strict, but they kept everybody in line. It was good. It was not the nicest school. The building was really, really old. In fact, of course, it's not there anymore. But of course, that was long before computers. There was no laptops in those days. And then I went on to Dowling High School, which was also a very old building and kind of decrepit. And I was there for 4 years. I never participated in sports. It kind of was tough with my dad because he always wanted us to be doing something, work. He always had work lined up for us, So, of course, I just used that as an excuse that I was not very good at sports. So anyway, that was, it was different. When you go to an all-boys school, the only co-ed mixing that was done is that there was a Catholic girls' school, and we'd have dances after basketball games or football games where the boys and girls would meet, and but it was quite innocent childhood, and it was enjoyable. I cannot complain. I enjoyed my childhood very much. I was never I was never depressed, never had any problems in that respect. Never did any drugs. No. So anyway, I don't know. Is there any more?
What did your community look like outside of your family?
Oh, it's kind of funny, At that time, we as kids, we roamed all over our neighborhood when we were kids. I mean, I knew every street within a mile of our house. I could tell you the names of all the streets. Today, I can't tell you the street next to us. You know what I mean? You were more cognizant of different things. I mean, in those days, you knew every car and every model, which today you can't. You can't keep up with stuff like that. But of course, that was the days when you had a dial phone. I still remember my phone number from my childhood, which was, we're talking 70 years ago. I can remember the phone number. That's the way things were. But as far as childhood, it was a good childhood. And as far as you're asking about the neighborhood or the community, my folks did not socialize hardly at all. We pretty much was socializing as kids. Primarily with kids we knew. In the wintertime, there was a pond across the street, and the city would have skating in that pond in the winter. And during the wintertime, whenever the skating was open, I lived there. I was a skating fanatic. And but other than that, I don't know really what I could say about community unless you had some specific question you wanted to ask.
No, but I'm gonna change the topic a little bit. So, what do you remember, about, if you mind talking about it? You said you went to Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember any specific events or anything that happened there that you want to talk about?
Well, the way it happened was I had enlisted in the Marine Corps for 3 years, so I was scheduled to get out in July 1st of 1965. Well, in November of 64, let me back up a little bit. When I went through basic training, when I completed my basic training in California and in Camp Pendleton, California, I was able to go home on leave for, 20 days or whatever, and then I had to report back there. Well, when I reported back there, there was a huge concern that we were going to get involved in Cuba. That was during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And we were kind of on standby. We thought there was a good possibility we might have to go to Cuba. Well, as it turned out, it didn't happen. But again, back to where 1964, in November, we had what they call a field problem. That's when the whole battalion goes from point A to point B, and to practice what we did, which was we had guided missiles. Mm-hmm. We shot guided missiles to shoot down airplanes and stuff. So we had gone from our base in 29 Palms to a base in Yuma, Arizona, which was about 150 miles away. It was in winter too. It does get cold in California, in parts of it. So anyway, we had no more than got there and tried to set up a camp area and stuff like that. And then they come down and they said, take everything and load it back up on the trucks. We're going back to our base. So we did, and we loaded up and went back to the base. Everybody was dead tired because it had been a long day. So we got back to our base, and they said, we're going to leave. We're going to leave the U.S. So they was told not to tell anybody. Don't call your girlfriends and don't tell your wives that you're leaving. Big secret. I was dumb enough to believe it. I didn't call Marcia. Mm-hmm. And but anyway, we left probably the next day or two, and we went to a place called Port Hueneme, California, which is on the coast. It's north of Los Angeles. I can't remember exactly where it was at. It went off again. It's still there.
There we go.
It must be on a timer. Huh? Anyway, we loaded onto the ships, 2 different ships at Port Hueneme, and we went to Okinawa. Mm-hmm. And there was a Marine base, a Marine camp in Okinawa, and we stayed there for a couple of months, from November until March, around the 1st of March of 65. And excuse me. And then March 65, we went back on the ships, the same ships, and they took us to Vietnam. And when we unloaded in Vietnam and set up camp in what had been a French kind of a French fort that the French had, because the French had been battling the Vietnamese for years, but they had left several years prior. And so we set up this summit camp, which was